Hi, and welcome to Design Thinking PDX from Kent ISD. My name is Keith Tramper, and today I'm going to be talking to you about effective brainstorming. Brainstorming can be one of the most challenging parts of the design thinking process, especially when you're working with young students. We've had a lot of practice at this, and I thought I'd share one of the most effective strategies we've found for brainstorming. The strategy looks like this. You start with an individual brainstorm so your students can generate all the ideas that are in their head and put them down on paper. Then you move on to a group brainstorm where each learner gets a chance to share their ideas with their team and generate some new ideas inspired by their teammates. Lastly, we look at the most promising ideas, we evaluate some of them, and choose one that we're going to move forward with. As we move throughout this process, our ideas get bigger and bigger. During group brainstorm, you'll even get more ideas generated. And then lastly, you kind of bring it back down and develop your most promising idea. So let's get into the details for how each one of these steps works. To get started with the individual brainstorm process, you're going to want to start by getting a hold of some sticky notes and writing utensils. To prepare for it, I find it helpful to share some of the critical mindsets that will help your students be successful with the brainstorming portion. I'll share those with you in just a second. In general, you want your students to come up with as many ideas as they possibly can, putting one idea on each sticky note that they've got in front of them. We find that 5 minutes is about the right amount of time for generating ideas. Lastly, make sure that you give pause for your students who just need a second to finish their thoughts before moving on to the next step. So these are those mindsets that are helpful for students in the individual brainstorm phase. There are no bad ideas. Turn off that critic inside of your head that tells you you've got a bad idea, and just write it down on the sticky note. Encourage wild ideas. The wilder, the better. Don't focus on the things that would never happen. Be visual. Sometimes words can't describe what's in your head, and it's easier just to draw a picture. Go for volume, as many ideas as you can think of. As Linus C. Palmer puts it, the best way to have a good idea is to have lots of ideas. Lastly, don't get into the weeds on your ideas. Just give the headline. Avoid adding too much information. I find it helpful to put these up on the board in the room so that your students can refer back to them while they're working. After your students have had some time to individually brain dump all their ideas, now it's time to get together with the group. We find that groups of 3 are the optimal group size. If that doesn't quite work out, 4 is a good number to go with as opposed to 2. There's a new set of mindsets for group brainstorming that are different than the individual brainstorming. I'll show you those in a second. But the expectations during this time are to take turns sharing. Make sure that nobody eats up all of the airtime. Those sticky notes that have all your ideas on them need to go into a visible space for the whole group to see. Generally, you need a little more time to go through this. We find 10 minutes is about right. Okay, after you've set those expectations, it's time for your students to share. They take turns reading their ideas, putting the sticky notes visibly for the whole group to see. And if their teammates have great ideas that generate new ideas for them, they can just write it down on a new sticky note quietly and share it during the expand portion. Once the group's ideas have all been shared, students can then share their new ideas that were generated. It can be good to practice yes and, meaning you take a teammate's idea and you build off of it. Something like, I really like this about your idea, and I would add this to it. The mindsets that are helpful during group brainstorming are these. Be visual. Display your ideas in a place where everybody can see it. Again, use those headlines. One thing that's major here is that all ideas hold value. You don't want to get married to just your ideas. Some students have a tendency to do that. Heck, some adults have the tendency to do that. There's no bad ideas, and at this point you're not judging. Build upon the ideas of others and add new ideas. Follow the inspiration that comes from the discussion you have with your teammates. Okay, so all the ideas are out on the table, and now it's time to hone in on the one idea that your students want to prototype. I like to start out by having students take a moment to organize their ideas. They can move those sticky notes around to group similar ideas together. This helps the brain not feel overwhelmed with the amount of ideas they have to consider. Again, there's another set of mindsets for students to be successful with this portion. I'll show you that in a second. And I find it helpful to go back to the challenge definition that your students came up with before you get into evaluating the ideas that are in front of you. Okay, now it's time to evaluate. They should go through all the ideas that are in front of them and decide which ones seem to have the most merit. It can be helpful for groups with lots of ideas to draw stars on the sticky notes that have the most promise. Ultimately, they need to select one idea they want to go with. The mindsets that are helpful here is that, again, all ideas hold value. Sometimes students' feelings get hurt when they feel judged by their teammates. It's important to reiterate over and over that you're evaluating the ideas, not the people. It's really important to revisit the design challenge and stay in empathy mode so you make sure that your solution meets the needs of your user. And lastly, keep it simple and avoid combining ideas into complex solutions. Once your students have selected an idea, it's time for them to move on to prototyping their solution. Need to see brainstorming in action? Check out this video from IDEO. You can use this slide deck with your students. Just go to bit.ly/pdx-brainstorm to get your own copy. That's it for this episode of Design Thinking PDX. We'll catch you next month in your inbox.